All right, so today we are going to continue factoring quadratics. The difference today is the number in front of the x squared is not going to be 1. So instead of having something like x squared minus 4x plus 6, we're now going to have something like 3x squared minus 4x plus 6. And that changes some of the steps that we need to take to solve this. A lot of what we do is going to be the same, but at the beginning of the problem, we're going to do one extra step. At the end of the problem, we're going to do one extra step. So before we get into some of these deeper problems, there's a little bit of review that I need to go over with you, and that's talking about the greatest common factor. So I'm not going to read this box to you. I would pause the video, read this box about greatest common factor, hit play after you've read through that. All right, so what we do first, anytime you get a quadratic and there is a number in front of whatever the largest exponent is. So in this case, it's not a squared problem. It's just an 8x, a regular 8x. It's not 8x squared. But in front of that largest x, there's a number. The first thing that we want to do is look for a greatest common factor that we can factor out. In this case, I look at the 8 and the 72, and I look for the largest number that goes into both. And for this problem, that is an 8. And what it means to factor out the greatest common factor is I want to divide both of those by 8. I want to pull an 8 out. It's kind of like undistributing. So when I take 8x and I divide by 8, I'm just left with x. When I take negative 72 and I divide it by 8, I'm left with negative 9. Now, this equation on top, this expression on top, and the expression on bottom are exactly the same thing. They're just written in a different way. So if I wanted to double check my work, I could take this 8, distribute it, that's 8x. Take this 8, distribute it, that's negative 72. So I end up right back where I started, okay? We want this one in the middle, okay? We want to look for a greatest common factor, because if we can find one, it may help the rest of my factoring go a lot easier, and it's required sometimes. We can't ignore the fact that there's a number there. So we're going to practice a couple more of these. 25x squared plus 15x. I'm looking for the largest number that goes into 25 and 15 because I want to pull that out of the parentheses. In this case, it's a 5. This problem's a little bit different because I also have an x squared and an x. And if you go back to 7th grade, you learned that you could pull out an x if everything has an x. So now when I divide, 25 divided by 5 is 5. X squared, if I divide one of the x's away, I'm just left with x. Plus 15 divided by 5 is 3. And if I pull an x out, there's no x left. So that would be my final factoring. So 5x times 5x plus 3. Okay, negative 3x squared minus 12x plus 9. There's something in front of the x squared, so I would like to pull out a number if I can. In this case, we don't like that negative being in front of the x squared, so I'm going to actually pull out a negative 3 because everything is divisible by 3, right? 3, 12, and 9, which means it's also divisible by negative 3. So when I divide out a negative 3, I get x squared. I get a plus 4x because a negative 12 divided by a negative 3 is a positive 4. And then a positive 9 divided by a negative 3 is negative 3. Okay, the last one in front, I have a 2. I've got a 12 and a 16. So I think I can pull out 2, and I'm left with x squared plus 6x plus 8. All right, so step 1, anytime you are factoring a quadratic, is look for a greatest common factor that you can pull out of the problem, okay? All right, now what happens when you can't get rid of that number in front? In these examples, we got rid of the number in front. So if I wanted to finish factoring this example right here, I could just go do my normal X method that I learned and put 4 up here and -3 down here. And whoops, I wrote those backwards. -3 on top and 4 down here. And I would just look for my normal X method, right? What happens, though, is sometimes we can't get rid of that number in front of the x squared. It won't factor out, okay? And when that happens, we have to do a couple of extra things. So here are, here's kind of the method that we are going to go through. Do we want to go through? You know what? That's a great example for you to look through when you don't have someone to explain it. I'm going to walk you through this process. So this isn't a bad idea to pause the video and look at this. This isn't a bad idea to go back and look at on your own, but I'm here to explain it. So I'm going to go right down to example number 1. So in example number 1, I've got this 2 out in front of the x squared. So the first thing I look for is there an option for me to factor out that 2 and get rid of it? This has a 2, this has a 1, this has a -15. Nothing goes into all 3 of those. So that 2x squared is stuck. That x squared can't go anywhere. It's stuck where it is. So the method that I use is we're going to kind of cheat a little bit. Normally, I would put -15 on top, but I can't because of this number in front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that number in front of the x squared, and I'm going to times it by the -15, and I'm going to get -30. Don't worry too much about the math behind why we are doing this. We're using a little bit of a shortcut. We're using some manipulation of the problem to come up with the answer. And it's not really math you need to worry about until your 4th year of college and you're studying math as a professional. So -30 goes on top. On the bottom, I put whatever's in front of the x, which is a 1. That number stays the same, okay? It doesn't change. So on number 2, I've got this 4 in front. I can't factor it out because I've got 4, -17, and -42. I can't get rid of that 4. So to factor this, I'm going to multiply 4 by -42. Geez, that's a big one. So what? -168 is what's going to go on top. And on the bottom, I'm going to put -17. Okay. Now, we're not done with either of these, obviously. I just wanted to kind of show you step 1. Now, step 2 is to do what we always do. I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to be the top and add up to be the bottom. So I just start going through my multiplications of what equals 30. You know, so 1 and 30, those aren't going to work. 2 and 15, those aren't going to work. 3 and 10 aren't going to work. 5 and 6 multiply to be 30, but one of them is going to have to be negative, and I'm going to make it -5 because -5 plus 6 equals +1, which is what I want on the bottom. So I just kind of do the normal thing, what I always do. I look for the numbers that work. So I've got a -5 on this side and a 6 on this side. I'm going to erase these other numbers so they don't mix us up. Now, normally, I would just, and please don't write this down, normally I would just do x minus 5 and x plus 6 and be done. But I can't do that because at the beginning of the problem, I kind of cheated and I multiplied this 2 to come up with this number. So before I write my answer, I need to undo that little bit of a cheat that I did. I multiplied by 2. Now I've got to divide by 2. So what I divide by 2 are both of these numbers, okay? Now when I do that, usually one of them will come out to be a nice number, right? 6 divided by 2 is 3. That's wonderful. That's a beautiful number. That's going to go in my first parenthesis. The other side, -5 divided by 2, is not a nice number. If I try to divide that, I get a decimal. Now, I don't want to use that decimal. I'm going to stress that again. Don't use the decimal. The decimal is a hint to you that I've got to use these numbers. And what I do when I use those numbers is I'm going to put them in the parenthesis, but the 2 that's on the bottom is going to go in front of my x, and the number on the top is going to go after the x. So I'm going to use those 2 numbers, but I'm going to put them in a little bit different place than I normally would. And this is my final answer. So when I factor 2x squared plus x minus 15, I end up with x plus 3 multiplied by 2x minus 5. Okay, let's do another one. I already multiplied the 4 by the negative 42 and got negative 168. Now I need to start dividing numbers until I should have gotten a calculator ready for this one because I didn't do these problems ahead of time. So what kind of things go into 168? You're going to get 1 and 168. Those aren't going to get me to 17. 2 and 84 aren't going to get me to 17. 168 divided by 3 is a big number. 3 and 56, those aren't going to get me to 17. I can divide it by 4. 4 and 42, I already tried those ones. Those don't get me to negative 17. It's not going to divide by 5. It might divide by 6. 6 and 28 don't quite get me to negative 17. I'm getting closer though, right? I'm getting closer to being able to come up with a 17. So let's do 168 divided by 8. That gives me 8 and 21. That's not going to get me to 17. So does it divide by 7? 168 divided by 7. It does. There we go. 7 and 24 are going to be the numbers I'm looking for. So I'm going to erase all these just so they're not a mess for the video. I've got 7 and 24. Now, one of those needs to be a negative. I want them to add up to be negative 17. So my big number is the negative number. All right, now, because I cheated and I multiplied by 4 at the beginning, now I need to divide both of my answers by 4. Don't forget that step. Otherwise, you get the wrong answer. 7 divided by 4 is not a nice number. Negative 24 divided by 4 is a nice number. It's negative 6. So that's going to go in my first parenthesis, x minus 6. My second parenthesis is going to use these numbers. The bottom number is going to go in front of my x, and the top number is going to go after the x. So I get x minus 6 multiplied by 4x plus 7. Okay. All right, let's try a couple more. Number 3, 5x squared plus 4x minus 1. Nothing can get factored out. Nothing goes into 5, 4, and 1. So when I do my factoring, I'm going to cheat and multiply 5 times negative 1 to get negative 5 on top. 4 still goes on the bottom. And I need 2 numbers that multiply to be 5. Luckily, there's only one option, 1 and 5. But I need one of those to be a negative, and it's going to be the 1, so that they add up to be 4. Now, don't write x minus 1, x plus 5, because at the beginning I multiplied by 5, so now I need to divide by 5 to get my final answer. 5 divided by 5 becomes 1. Nice. I get x plus 1 here. Negative 1 divided by 5 is not a nice number. So when I write that one in the parenthesis, I'm going to write 5x minus 1 as my second parenthesis. And that'll be my factored form of 5x squared plus 4x minus 1. Okay, let's keep going. Number 4, 4x squared plus 37x plus 40. Nothing goes into 4, 37, and 40. So I can't factor anything out. So I've got to take 4, unfortunately, and times it by 40, and that gives me 160. Now, when you get to these big ones, don't be afraid to use your calculator and divide. We're looking for things that multiply to be 160, and they're going to add up to be 37. Okay, remember that middle number, you never change. That always goes on the bottom exactly the way that it is. So 160, you've got 1 and 160. You've got 2 and 80. You've got 3 won't work, 4 will work, 4 and 40. 5 and 32. Ooh, those might be my magical one. 5 and 32 add up to 37. So those are the ones that I want right there. But I cheated. At the beginning of the problem, I multiplied by 4, so I have to divide both of these answers by 4. 32 divided by 4 is 8. I like that because now one of my answers is x plus 8. The other answer comes from the 5 divided by 4. And that doesn't simplify, so we just put the 4 in front of the x and the 5 after the x, and we call it good right there. Okay, nothing factors out of this one either. I thought this might be one where we could factor something out, but it doesn't. 9, negative 30, and 16, nothing goes into each of those. So again, I'm going to do 9 times 16, which I think is 144. If I'm wrong, delete the video, switch teachers, take another class because I don't know what I'm doing. Bottom number is negative 30, right? So I took 9, times it by 16, I got 144. Now I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be 144 and add up to be 30. So I've got 1 and 144. I've got 2 and 72. I've got, I don't think 3 is going to work. How about 4? 4 and 36. I'm getting close to 30. 5 won't work. 6 should work, but I don't know what that one is in my head. 144 divided by 6 is going to be 24. There we go. That's the magic number. 6 and 24 are the numbers that I want. So big 6, big 24. None of these are going to work. Now, they multiply to be positive 144, but they add up to be negative 30. So these are both negative numbers because that's the only way to make that combination happen. So back at the beginning of the problem, I multiplied by 9. I've got to divide by 9. So negative 24 divided by 9, negative 6 divided by 9. Now this one, weird things happen. Neither one of these comes out to be a very nice number. Negative 24 divided by 9, it simplifies to be what? Negative 8 over 3, which is not a nice number. Negative 6 over 9 also simplifies, but it becomes negative 2 over 3. So neither one of these completely simplify to a regular number. That's okay. They're both just going to look like they have a number in front of the x. So my first parenthesis is going to use this answer, and it's going to be 3x minus 2. My second parenthesis is going to use this answer, and it's going to be 3x minus 8. So that one was a little bit different because both numbers don't simplify. No big deal. We still got an answer. Okay, number 6, finally something that we can factor because I've got an 8, a 48, and a 22. Now, 2 goes into all of those. So does 4. No, 4 doesn't go into 22. So the only thing I'm going to be able to factor out is a 2. And I'm going to be left with 4x squared. 48 divided by 2 is 24x. 22 divided by 2 is 11. So I'm left with 2 times 4x squared plus 24x plus 11. So I got something to factor out, but I still have a number in front of the x squared, which means I'm not done yet. I've got to do what I did in all the other problems. I've got to take that number 4 and multiply it by 11 and put it on top. And then I've got to put the 24 on the bottom. And I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be 44 and add up to be 24. So if I look at 44, I've got 1 and 44. I've got 2 and 22, which are going to be the ones that work, right? 2 times 22 is 44. So that's the number that I want because those add up to be 22. Now, because I multiplied by 4, I need to divide by 4. And when I do that, it's kind of like number 5. Neither one of these cleans up all the way. This one becomes 11 over 2. This one becomes 1 over 2. So when I write my answers, I've got to use 1 over 2 and 11 over 2. So I put 2x plus 1, and I put 2x plus 11. And I've got this 2 up above from earlier that was in front of the parenthesis. I need to put it in front of the parenthesis down here at the bottom still. It's still there. It didn't go away. I just ignored it for a minute while I factored everything else. But then at the end, I put it back in the front. Okay, practice these. I know it says 3-4, but it's actually 3-2 practice because we changed the numbers from last year. And step 1, try to factor something out and then do the big X method with whatever you have left over. All right? When you need help, go ahead, come see me. I'll give you a hand.